Yeah, let's. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this Apeldoorn JUG session. My name is Yuri Flederman. I'm one of the hosts here at Apeldoorn JUG. And today we have Piet van Dongen with us to shed his light on migrating huge amounts of interconnected applications in an orderly fashion to the cloud. And I will give the mic to Piet in a moment. But before I do, I have a couple of quick announcements. The first is that this session is organized under the flag of Apeldoorn JUG. And Apeldoorn JUG is a cooperation between 4 IT companies in Apeldoorn. These are Belastingdienst, Kadaster, Pocket for Cloud, and Luminis. And the 4 of us rotate organization. So today's session is brought to you by Luminis. And then now, usually I give you a little preview about the next session. But for now, it is still unclear when the next session will be and also what it's going to be about. That's partly because of the holidays coming up in a couple of weeks. But when there is more clarity, we will announce the next session on our Meetup page, and you will probably all get that announcement. But for now, I cannot give you a preview. Yeah, with that being said, I would like to give the mic to Piet and say to all of you, have fun.
Okay, thank you, Yuri. I'll just start by sharing my screen and then starting the presentation. During the presentation, I can't see you because I have my presenter notes on this screen, presentation on the other one. But if you want to interrupt me for questions, then you can just either raise your hand and Yuri will notify me or just speak up. So today, the next about 45 minutes, I'm going to talk about migrating applications to the cloud. So first, a little about me. My name is Piet. That's my picture. Here's me live. This is my living room. I work at Luminis as a cloud consultant slash software engineer. And in that role, I recently migrated a huge amount of applications for clients to the cloud, hence this talk. And I've also written down the experience of migrating and the theory I collected in a white paper. You can download it at this URL, and you can leave your email and phone number, but if you don't want us to contact you, then that's the only thing you need to do to download it. It's very high level, like this talk, and I think it's just fine to read in an afternoon. It's in Dutch, by the way, and if you're non-Dutch speaking, we will publish an English version very soon. The illustrations you see on the slides are done by Joost Verwij. He also did the illustrations for the white paper. Okay, so what are we going to talk about today? It's a talk in 3 parts. First, I'm going to outline how to prepare for a cloud migration, and also shed some light on why you should or should not choose the cloud for your organization. Then I'm going to talk about the actual migration. So what do you need to think about? How is a migration looking like? What's it looking like? What do you need? What people do you need? What tools? What are the caveats? How fast can you go? I'll try to answer those questions. And at the end, I'll peek into what you could do after migrating to the cloud. And at the end, we can also do a Q&A round. If you don't have questions during the presentation, you can keep them, but you can also ask me during the presentation. Okay, let's scope this a little bit. So this talk is about mass migrations, not about small ones. So lifting a few containers into Google Cloud Compute, that's not what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about migrating huge landscapes of custom-made applications and not off-the-shelf software packages. We're going to talk about migrating systems. So, for example, software systems, applications, for example, but not infrastructure. So I'm not going to talk about how you can empty your data center if you only have huge amounts of racks with databases on them. I'm talking about application migrations. Also, this is about migrating, not transforming. There are a few books out on cloud migrations that are actually about cloud transformations for your organization. They are two different topics. And today I'm going to only cover migration, so the actual technical migration of applications. To do this, I wanted to use a metaphor. The first metaphor I chose was about eating an elephant, but my daughter is a vegetarian, and look at this elephant, you wouldn't, right? So I chose a different one about crossing an ocean. So a migration is similar to crossing an ocean and going for unknown territory. So you're here, this is where you live on this piece of land. It's very comfortable, but you've heard that on the other side of the ocean, things are much, much better. So you want to get to there, to the X. You know there's an island somewhere in between. So you'll head off in a direction with your boats, like this. And what happens sometimes is you encounter something which makes you have to change course. So now you're going to have to go around this huge sea monster. And after a few days, weeks, months, you'll encounter an iceberg. So you have to change course again. In the direction of the X, you're almost there, and then pirates. Can always happen, even in this day and age. But you can circumvent pirates as well. And then after a few crisscrosses, you're in the land of golden opportunity. So this metaphor I chose because it's very similar to an actual migration. You can plan a migration in advance, but if you're going to plan into too much detail, or you're going to try to plan without being able to change course, then you're going to have a bad time. And also hence the illustrations about ocean shipping. Okay, so the first part of the talk is about preparing your cloud migration. And I'm going to start with why you should or could or should not move to the cloud. This is information from the State of DevOps report. There are a couple of benefits to migrating to the cloud, and they've measured the benefits in terms of deployment frequency. So how often do you deploy code to production? Lead time, so how long does it take for code to go from commit to release? The third one is time to restore. How long does it take to restore services when users are impacted, so downtime or services that don't work anymore? And fourth is change failure rate. That's about what percentage of your changes leads to service degradation and has to be fixed. So the people from the State of DevOps report try to measure these categories for the respondents. And they've categorized the respondents into four categories. One is elite performance, so the best performing organizations. The other one is low performance, and in between you have high and medium performance. But I'm only going to compare the elite and low performance. So in terms of deployment frequency, what you see for the elite is that they can deploy on demand. So if they want to deploy, they can do it immediately, where the low performance can do it 1 to 2 times a year. The lead time for the elite is less than a day, so from commit to release. And the low performance can take between 1 month to half a year. Restoring services when users are impacted, the elite performance can do this in under an hour. The low performance take 1 to 5 weeks. Performance for elites in terms of change failure rate, so what percentage of changes leads to service degradation, is 0 to 15%, and for low performance, 45 to 60%. So this means that this compacts each other. So if you're having trouble getting your stuff into production and also are introducing error half of the time, and it takes you 1 to 5 weeks to fix it, your problems are going to compound. So this is not necessarily something that the cloud makes you or enables you, but what we see is that elite performers are 24 times as likely to use cloud. And the why, we'll get to that. What they also do better is cost estimates. If they use the cloud, they can easily identify where costs are in their systems, and they are better at staying below budget. What you also see on the soft people side is that their employees are generally more healthy and more satisfied with their jobs. So these are the characteristics of companies, organizations that use cloud. Then I want to zoom into what the definition of cloud is in this talk. So we all know this bumper sticker, right? There's no cloud, there's just someone else's computer. But this was maybe true 15 years ago. But nowadays, the cloud that I'm talking about, is something completely different. So take the sticker off your laptop or car, unless you're only using the infrastructure part of the cloud. But the cloud is more than that. So the definition of cloud, as I'm going to talk about it, is defined by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. They've defined 5 characteristics of cloud. And those 5 characteristics, if your cloud has that, then you're doing cloud as I'm talking about it. So the first is you need to be able to provision, your employees need to be able to provision resources themselves without any interaction. So this means that they can save time to do their jobs. So they can focus on the creative part, on the building part of their jobs. The next one is broad network access. So everyone needs to be able to access their cloud platform using their desktop, tablet, phones, workstations. They should be able to work from home, especially in these times, from Starbucks or from the office. So that's mostly a given these days. Resource pooling is about no needing to think about physical details. So, for example, if you want to have a database, you don't have to think about the iron below it. Or you don't have to think about a file system if you're going to pick a bucket to store your files. This one is about scaling up and down without, or virtually without a ceiling, and without having to do it manually, so automatic scaling. And the last one is about measuring everything. So you're always on top of what you're actually using and how your cloud or your infrastructure is performing. So in other words, this is about focusing on the job to be done for your customers. So for example, if we do another metaphor, skateboarding, someone that buys a skateboard does buy a set of wheels and trunks and screws and a board and some grip tape, but that's not what they want. They don't want a set of pieces, parts. What they want is this. So the cloud enables you, the cloud as I'm talking about today, enables you as a developer, as an organization, to focus on getting your customers to get their job done. Okay, so now I have sketched what I think the cloud can be for your organization. So hopefully you're motivated to perform a cloud migration, or you can think we don't need this. So if you're in the first category, how are you going to migrate to the cloud? That's what I'm going to talk about now. So the first thing you need to know is that a cloud migration is sounds like a technical job, but it's people's work as well, as is building software. So you have to pick a crew or think about the people side of the cloud migration job. There are some things to think about. The first thing is psychological safety. So during a cloud migration, imagine you're in an organization that has a data center and you're deploying Java applications to IBM servers or application servers, and you're going to have to migrate to the cloud, perhaps to a Kubernetes cluster, or maybe you're going to do serverless. What you will have to do is experiment and fail a lot. And the only way that's going to succeed is if you are safe, if you're daring to fail and then succeed. So to have some sort of culture where it is encouraged to experiment. Then you will have to think about how you're going to share all this knowledge that you've gained during the cloud migration. You're going to have to start small and then spread the knowledge through the organization. You can do that in a lot of ways, but some are more effective than others. For example, communities of practice, they worked well. There's also in the State of DevOps report, grassroots efforts are also proven to be working fine for this. But for example, a center of excellence, that doesn't work as effective as the other ones. So you have to think about how to scale and how to spread your knowledge. Then you have to have a platform team. So to be able to remember the previous slide, to be able to provision your infrastructure yourselves without any human interaction, you have to have a platform that's suited for your organization. So what you see in effective cloud migrations is that there's always a team that takes care of the platform. So the teams that are going to do the application migration have something to land on. So they are a dedicated team that are not going to do application development, but they're going to do platform development. So they listen to their users, which are developers, and they will build what they need. And then something we recently did in a project, a cloud migration team is a team of experts, cloud experts that you can hire or create that can kickstart the migration. For example, they have a lot of cloud knowledge and they can help you get from your IBM application server, for example, into a Kubernetes cluster. They know how to do this on the application and infrastructure level. So these are people that can help you kickstart your migration. Then I promised to give you some examples from real life, from our practice. So here's the first one. What we recently did in a huge migration for a huge insurance company in the Netherlands is create a platform team for the reasons I just talked about. And they were half people from the organization itself, and the rest were consultants. So that way they could start quickly, and the knowledge that the consultants already had could spread into the organization. Then Luminis, the company I work for, they formed a migration team. So that's all consultants, and they were the cloud experts for the development teams that help development teams move their applications from, in this case, Java application servers to containers in the new environment. And last of all, the development teams, they were all client. So they were already there. They were the existing development teams. So the pros of this is that you have less bottlenecks. You can start quickly. You have a platform team that enables developers to be able to migrate. And the downside of this is that that platform team, what we discovered that if they slow down or they are not fast enough, then you'll have bottlenecks in your process. So the speed of the platform team is going to dictate the speed at which you can migrate as a development team. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, so back to the theory. So now you know which people and soft skills you need. Now, how do you plan a migration? So the first and most important thing you need to do is think about the why of your migration. So if you're just going to migrate for the sake of it, or because you're, for example, your data center is going to be closed, or your CTO says so because he was at a conference and he was totally convinced that you need to migrate to the cloud. even then, you'll have to think about why, because you have to convince everyone and motivate everyone to do the actual migration, and you have to have the benefits very clearly lined out. The next thing you need to know is assess what you currently have. So if you have a huge system, application landscape, then you need to know what you have and how you are going to migrate this. For example, if you have a huge cluster of applications that are connected to services and databases and queues, then you will want to know how they are interconnected. I'll get to this in a few slides. You also have to plan the migration, and by planning I don't mean in detail what are you going to do when and how exactly, but you have to have a broad view of how you're going to get from A to B. And what helps is to have milestones. For example, this is standard project management, but you have to have some milestones to determine when you are going to want to be where, so the teams can plan their work themselves. What also helps is a blueprint. For example, if you have a huge group of applications that are very similar, then it helps to pick one, migrate it, and use that as a blueprint for the other ones. So you can migrate the rest faster. What's also important, last point in this slide, is that you have to migrate to production. So if you're going to migrate to a sandbox, for example, then you're not going to encounter problems you will have in production. So this forces you to actually do the real migration, think about what you're going to actually land and what problems you're going to have to solve and how. And the other upside is if you're going to migrate to production, then if you have migrated one application, you've already completed part of the whole project. Okay, so I talked about creating or assessing the landscape you currently have. So what we recently did for a client is something similar to this. So we created a web application, an interactive one, where all their systems, this is not their actual landscape, this is a fake one, but it's very similar, where all their systems and their applications, their queues, their databases, and other external services were mapped out. And you could filter and search for those applications and other systems and use it as some sort of whiteboard to plan your migration. So for example, if you wanted to know how fast you could do a message queue application or migration, you would have to know how all applications are connected to their queues. So for example, if two applications are connected to the same queue, then you'll probably have to move that queue and those two applications at the same time, or at least update them to connect to the same queue when it's migrated. We're going to open source this later this year. I'll try to notify the user group when I do. Then you can take a look at it yourselves. Okay, so you've made sure you know the why, you've motivated your people, you made a plan. Now you're going to do the migration. And the first thing you have to do is succeed in going to production. That's very important, especially in the beginning. So don't do a huge complex migration, start small. For example, you start with one team that has a medium complex application and you'll migrate it to production. What's important here is that you are creative and you have a broad scope. Speed and efficiency come later. So you also have to start learning a lot. You have to learn about the platform. You have to learn about new tools. You have to learn about how your application is going to do in production, that kind of stuff. So this phase is much about learning, being creative. So here's where the psychological safety comes back into play. So if you feel safe or motivated to actually do this, to experiment, then you will succeed in migrating your first applications. And remember, you have to aim for production. after these first successes, then you can focus on speeding up. But you have to keep some things in mind. For example, here's a graph that is about estimating a project. And a migration is actually a huge project. So if you want to have an idea of how fast you can go or when you will be done, then in the beginning you'll have to, you have a very broad estimate with a lot of uncertainty. But as you speed up, you will have a better grip on the whole project. This is just something to keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is the standard lean graph about the batch size. So if your batch size, so the number of applications in this case that you're going to migrate increases, then your throughput will slow down. So this goes for tasks or maybe applications or systems. The more you do at the same time, the less speed you can create. This one is about risk. If you do a lot of application migrations in a short time, then you will reduce the risk that your whole migration is going to fail or cost a lot of money. So if you do a lot of deployments to production, then in short iterations, then the only risk you have is during the migration of the application. So from another perspective, if you would do a migration, a big bang migration, then from the start of the migration on the left side of the x-axis until the actual big bang on the right side, you won't know if your migration has succeeded. So all the effort and money you put into the migration is going to be at risk until your big bang is going to succeed. So if you do smaller iterations, for example, Scrum-like method, then your risk will be reduced or spread out over time. And every time you release to production, you will know if your risk or your money invested will return, will have been for a good reason. So this is a waterfall agile DevOps graph. So if you're going to do a migration, try to do it in short iterations and try to get a grip on the DevOps way of working. I'll get to that later. So while you're migrating, you also want to keep track of how the migration is going. So you have to evaluate constantly where you are in your whole migration process. You have to look ahead. So remember the metaphor of the ship on sea. You have to look ahead to prevent crashing into an iceberg, or in terms of an application migration, if you're not going to finish setting up the platform in time, you're going to have to slow down the development teams. So someone or some people have to look ahead during the migration. You also need to constantly make sure that everyone is still aware of the why of the migration, and you need to make sure that they are still supporting the migration. And if they don't, you have to make sure you'll fix it, or at least you have to make sure you'll fix the problem, the why they are not going to support the migration anymore or less. So you have to do demos, talks, maybe a party if the migration succeeds, or do some motivational speeches. Maybe you can invite a cloud expert to do a cool talk on the newest machine learning services, or you'll send people to, I don't know, Las Vegas to join the AWS conference. That sort of stuff will help you maintain support for the migration. Also important is to be transparent. It's a huge project, and if you are transparent, then people get a sense of grip on the whole migration. Plus, they will also need, or they will be enabled to look ahead themselves, for example. And they can take decisions if necessary, or alert you to things you missed. And the last thing, you have to share your successes. So the first application that's migrated to production, I'd say throw a huge party, or buy a bottle of beer or champagne or chocolate. Celebrate the successes. So this will motivate everyone to keep going during this long and difficult migration. Okay, so another example from our practice. So for the migration I did recently, to be transparent and to keep an eye on what we did, I've set up a huge television screen in the middle of the office, or online now, where everyone could check at all times how far we were in migrating all their applications and queues and databases to production. But this is not the actual image. I've substituted the names of the systems and added and removed some. But here you can get a very quick feel for how the migration is going, where the bottlenecks are, if your team is doing well, if other teams maybe need help, that sort of stuff. So for example, here you can see that a lot of applications have already been migrated to the green part, the finish line, and some still have to be done on the left side, and the rest is all in transit. Okay, so you have done a lot of migration work. You're almost done migrating. So what then? That's a special phase in the migration. What you often see is that at the end, there are still some systems that people didn't want to touch, or they were complex, or you didn't have a plan yet, but they still need to be migrated. You can keep in mind here that lift and shift is almost always an option. So for example, if you have a message queue from, again, a big vendor, and you wanted to migrate to a queue as a service, in time, or maybe you don't want to take the risk for now, you can just try to lift and shift your application server, for example, to a virtual machine, or in an EC2 VM, and then later, when you're done with migration, tackle that problem that you still have. So you have to keep in mind that if you lift and shift, you'll always have to fix that later, because lifting and shifting systems is moving a problem, and in the cloud, a classical system is often more expensive to operate than on premise. As the Dutch say, de laatste loodjes zijn het zwaarst. So remember, as in any project, that you'll actually have to finish the whole migration before you're done. But you already knew that. And you'll have to keep in mind that speed is often just as important as quality here. And if you can choose between the two, then sometimes you can just, well, you have to focus on finishing the migration, but you don't have to, you have to make sure that you don't forget the technical debt that you accrue. There's always going to be technical debt, so you have to write that down and make a plan to fix that later. For example, the lift and shifts you just did, they need to be resolved, or the cost problem needs to be fixed. Okay, so sorry from a migration I did. So here the platform team, that's the one building the bridges. The application teams, that's the train. We knew that the platform team had to do a lot of work to enable the teams to go fast. And what we did there was try to focus on the speed of the platform team. And every decision that we made, we tried to make a decision if we could do it later or had to do it now. And if we could do it later, then we put it on the backlog and made a plan to fix it later, so the teams could keep on going. Okay, so now you're done with migrating. What's next? So after the migration, very briefly. So the third thing to keep in mind, this is about migrating, cloud migrations, but not cloud transformation. So a migration is a technical job, but that's never the goal. The migration itself is not the why of the migrating. So if you're done, you have to go back to the goal that you set for the migration. Think about why you wanted to go to the cloud, and when you got there, what you wanted to gain from it, and go from there. So that's called transforming, cloud transformation. And that's about a lot more than just technical stuff. The most important thing is, or at least the artifact of a cloud transformation, is a focus on a shorter time to value. Remember the skateboard stuff, the job to be done? The cloud enables you to very quickly do experiments where you can test if a hypothesis about business value, for example, if we create a skateboard with 5 wheels instead of 4, then we would sell a lot more skateboards. So in terms of our business, the software business, if you could try out that hypothesis quickly, then you quickly have an answer if your investments in building that experiment pay off. So the cloud enables you to do that because it's scalable. You have a lot of visibility of what your software is doing in terms of cost and performance, and you have the tools to quickly go into production. So that's probably your focus for the next period of time after migrating. And you'll quickly find out that if you're going to focus on a short time to value, that a technical change in your organization is not enough. You need to align, for example, business and IT to do these experiments I just talked about together. So a value hypothesis always comes from the business side, but actually trying it out needs everyone between the business and IT. So you have to have vertical slices of an organization to do cloud native work. And a way to start with this is do a challenge. For example, if you just migrated and you have lift and shifted some of your systems, then a good challenge would be to get teams to try to cut costs. So for example, you could do a hackathon where you challenge teams to cut their costs on a part of the system in a few days, and then give a huge prize to the winner, which paid for itself because you just cut costs. And this way you'll get teams to naturally align with each other, with business, for example, and platform teams, and work together. And also they'll get some experience in doing short iterations and experiments in the cloud. They'll also discover the new tooling, the stuff the cloud has to offer. So this is a good way to get people to transform. Summarizing. So you start with the reason for migrating, create a plan with a course plan, not too finely detailed. Start small with experiments and creative people, then scale up, get more efficient, get everyone to migrate themselves. Be generous with your knowledge, so share widely. For example, motivate people to get Azure certified or AWS or Google certified, and tell each other what they learned and how they did their migration, their part. Encourage everyone to join, not just the technical people, because this starts in boardrooms, or maybe not, but the why and the budget starts there. And you'll have to involve the whole organization in a migration, even when the business side of your organization isn't doing the migration themselves, because they have to do the transformation later on. And you can better start during the migration than after migration. Right, so another summary of all this is this non-existing quote of the writer of The Little Prince. So if you want to build a ship, you don't drum up people together to collect wood and assign them tasks and work, but you teach them to long for the endless immensity of the sea. So this is not the actual quote. The actual quote is this, but it's not as easy to explain. But the same goes for a migration. It's easier to do a migration if you motivated your people and convince them that the cloud is the place to be, then come up with a deadline and say, go fix the migration. So that was me. I'm going to close this, and then if you have some questions, we can do a little back and forth.